Welcome to the AirCon Vault. Here you can find the recordings of the live streams from AirWiggle's audio conference. These are made free thanks to our sponsors: A Sound Effect, Aftertouch Audio, Boom Library, Fmod, Game Audio Learning, Game SoundCon, Kiloheart, Rev Rooms, Soundcuts, Strata from Audio Kinetic, and AirWiggles, the online home for audio people. We hope you enjoy the video.
All right, so thank you everyone for being here, and thank you, David, of course. But just before we get started, I'm going to give a brief intro to myself. So I'm Noah Beazley. I'm a composer for games and an assistant professor of game audio at Berklee College of Music. I'm also a co-organizer of Game Audio Boston, and we are putting on an in-person event for AirCon this weekend. So if you want to see where you register for that, check out Greg's link in the chat. Cool. Well, that's enough about me. David, I'd love if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, of course. My name's David Housden. Started working in the industry about 13 years ago now, so I don't think I can be referred to as a snappy youngster anymore, unfortunately. But it's been, I've been fortunate enough to work on well over a dozen production cycles during that time. Largely for console and PC, but I did a few kind of mobile titles in my earlier years. Most recently, I worked on a game for Nintendo Switch called Disney Illusion Island. But before that, I was probably best known for my work on Thomas Was Alone with Mike Biffle.
Cool. So were you working on mobile games before you were working on Thomas Was Alone?
No, Thomas Was Alone was my first game. And it was the first time I actually wrote for media, believe it or not. I'd only just left university when that came around, and I'd kind of given myself a year to try and get some scoring work. Otherwise, I was going to have to do something less exciting and go and work behind a bar or something, as I had been throughout university, doing those kind of jobs. But yeah, that opportunity came along, and since then I haven't really ever had a job where I haven't been paid, so it was quite nice to land on my feet in that respect. But there's definitely a parallel universe where I'm working at a dive bar right now.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's an amazing opportunity right out of school. And so, how did you get linked up with those steps?
Well, I was studying music production at uni, and initially it was to try and learn how to engineer music. So I kind of fed up of paying people hundreds of pounds to make my band sound worse than we actually were in real life, which is quite a feat, actually. I thought it can't be this difficult to produce music to a high standard. But in my second year, I realized that I much preferred writing my own music to producing other people's. So I started gearing all of my modules towards composing, like anywhere where there was self-directed study or a chance for me to put my own input in, I geared it towards writing music for games. And then after I graduated, I must have wrote to about 250 companies, sort of speculatively asking for work. And I think I heard back from 3, and 2 of them were rejections, and one was an offer of a job interview to be a junior sound designer for a company. So I applied for that, and then I found out within 10 minutes of sending off my application that I wasn't going to be moving forwards with that role. So whilst all this was going on, I was just working on this hobby project in my spare time for Mike Biffle. So he was a designer at a studio, so he had a day gig, and then in his spare time he was working on this hobby project, and that ended up being Thomas Was Alone. And somehow it, rather than sort of being this little thing that sold about 200 copies and no one ever heard of, he was able to get it on Steam in the days where if you got a game on Steam, it was big.
Yeah.
And then PewDiePie did a video of it once it got on Steam, so then we got exposure to millions of people, and it got nominated for so many awards. It won a BAFTA. The music got nominated for loads of stuff as well, so it was a really great kind of starting point for my career. I think it sold over 4 million units at last count, so really right place, right time.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I mean, you definitely got lucky, but you also kind of make your own luck, right? Like you apply to so much stuff, and I'm always saying, like, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to cut in.
Yeah.
No, please. Yeah, no, all I was going to say is that, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, there's masses of luck involved in that, and I'm not naive enough to know otherwise, but equally, you're also correct. You have to, it's luck to get the opportunity. It's not luck with what you do with it. So, you know, I was very conscious that regardless of how many people played this game at the time, I thought it was going to be a few dozen. But I wanted to make sure that was the best advert for my work that I could possibly put forward, because you just never knew who was going to hear it or listen to it or play it. And it could have been, if nothing else, it could have been an opportunity for Mike to take me forwards with him on his next project. So I really wanted to put everything into it, even though I didn't necessarily feel it was going to be much of a commercial hit. But then that's where the luck came in, because it was.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm always encouraging students to work on game jams and to just kind of link up with developers who are also kind of early on and are working on something that looks really cool. And you know, it's you might not get it on your first try, but if you just kind of keep working with people who are really, you see something in their work and everyone's kind of like really putting everything into it. You know, you kind of increase your chances of that the more of it you do.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
No, I firmly believe that the best possible way to get into the industry is to build those relationships with folk who are at a similar level in their careers, and obviously be selective and make sure that they're actually creating art that you want to be a part of. To an extent, obviously, can't really afford to be too picky when we're starting out, but making those in-person relationships is so vital, and riding the wave of your careers together. I don't really think there's a better way of starting out, to be honest.
Yeah. So, I mean, pivoting over from the kind of more business side of it to the creative side, when you start working on a new project, what are you doing to start coming up with your concept for the music?
I normally try and get as much information as I possibly can out of the developers. Particularly in regard to art and narrative, I tend to draw the most inspiration from those areas, I would say. I don't find sort of early development grey box particularly inspiring, but it is useful to get a feel for the mechanics and general sort of pacing and flow of an experience. So if there is a prototype build, I will obviously play it and do my due diligence, but I really like the notes start to form up here when I get to look at the concept art, when I feel like I have a grasp on the emotional arc of the story. What are the developers wanting the players to be feeling and experiencing whilst they play the game? What can I communicate when the story isn't necessarily present during the game and they're just traversing from A to B? How can I make sure that the music's still reinforcing what we need them to be feeling? So they're the kind of things that I look at and find particularly inspiring for myself. I also have lots of conversations with either the creative director or whoever my point of contact is on the project to make sure that we're as aligned as possible on what their expectations are. If they've got kind of reference material, that's actually super helpful. I know a lot of people don't like temp. That it's not really temp what I'm talking about, but if they put together like a list of music that they feel would be representative of a score that they'd be happy with for the game, then that immediately puts me in the right ballpark in terms of what they're looking for. So I don't go off and do a dubstep score when they want, classical music or something. So, and generally speaking, if you get that communication right at the start of the project, it paves the way for everything else. If you take the time to do those early explorations and do a bit of back and forth together and a bit of trial and error to really try and find and refine and hone what the sound of the game is, then it saves you so many headaches down the road. And like generally speaking, I think I must be super lucky, but I never really get past like V2, V3. If I submit something, if it goes much further than that, there's normally been a breakdown in communication somewhere, and you have to just kind of go back and actually look at what my perception of the brief was and what the brief actually like. And if you're getting into sort of V20s and stuff, it's more of a communication breakdown for me. So.
Yeah, and I also just love what you were saying about kind of playing the prototype, even if it's just like triangles, like shooting at squares or whatever. You might not think that there's a lot of inspiration there, but like you said, seeing the pacing, seeing the mechanics, and combining that with the vision board they have or concept art they have, can be really useful for getting a kind of a picture of the game.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah.
And if it is a mechanics-driven experience rather than a narrative-driven experience, then you can ignore everything that I just said, and then that does become the single most important tool that you have to get you started at that point in time, because you're really scoring the action rather than underscoring the drama, so to speak.
Well, this is actually an excellent segue to my next question, which is exactly about this. So I mean, you've worked in a lot of narrative-driven games like Thomas Was Alone and Lost Words, and I'm so curious because I've worked on less kind of narrative games, and so I really want to know how that works in terms of interactivity, because with a film, you have the pacing dictated to you, and where the sync points are going to be, but the player kind of controls the pacing of a game, which seems so challenging for writing music for narrative.
Yes, I mean it can be. I mean, often in games, the real narrative beats are kind of confined to cutscenes or dialogue sequences, which the player may not have a lot of agency in. So those moments you obviously can just score as you would a piece of linear media, because it is. But yeah, when the player's allowed to do whatever they want whilst the story's unfolding, or while the story, as I was alluding to earlier, if the story isn't necessarily present, but you still want to be crafting their emotional experience as they're traversing from point A to point B or something, then that obviously requires a lot of depth. To answer your question, both of those games couldn't have been more different, even though you're absolutely right, they're both narrative-driven experiences. But in terms of how I approached them, Thomas Was Alone was an entirely procedurally generated system. So I basically compose a track for a level based on the keywords that Mike gave me in terms of what he wanted the audience to feel, which is such a simplistic way of doing things, but equally, it really does help you just kind of capture a raw emotion. If he says, this is about loneliness, this level's about loneliness, I go away and try and write a piece of music that encapsulates what I perceive to be a feeling of loneliness. And then more often than not, that tended to translate with people. So it was a really kind of pure, honest way of scoring things. But yeah, once I'd sort of built a track that I felt was representative of what we wanted to say, I then break it down into stems for each instrument, and then I chop those stems into loops of bars of 4, 8, 16, and we then, like Mike had, he coded directly into Unity. We didn't have any middleware at the time, so we were just using the audio engine. Kind of using a bespoke code audio thing. So yeah, he created a generative system that would sort of cause all of these loops to trigger and play at random. So the idea was that the arrangements were being composed on the fly. And it required a lot of iteration to make sure that the right layers had more or less chance of being selected than others, and that certain loops were not able to trigger simultaneously with others, because that could get quite messy if you have multiple layers of percussion playing over the top of each other and so on and so forth. So it required a lot of iteration to kind of get to a point where it was feeling musically fluid. But once we got there, we eventually created a system where you could play the game hundreds of times and you'd hear a different arrangement of a track every single time that you played it, which is pretty incredible it was, 13 years ago now, so really long time ago. I've never done anything that complex since, so I was like, yeah, okay, that wasn't fun, so let's slow it down a bit moving forwards. But yeah, the right emotional tone would always still be there, because all of those loops would still derive from that same track, which was written to capture that raw emotion. So yeah, that was Thomas Was Alone. But then Lost Words was a lot more granular, to be honest. I approached that a lot more similarly to how you would score a film or a TV show. I worked with video footage of a level, and then I would kind of look for hit points within the level where I felt the music needed to react or change in accordance with the action. Then I went through and kind of composed the individual cues and placed them and made them perform in a way which was sort of demonstrative of my ultimate intention for the game. And then I write a PDF document with time codes to highlight how I sort of made everything work and interact with each other. And then the sound designer or audio programmer would then, I can't remember what we used for Lost Word. It might have been Wise, I think, but they then set it up within Wise so it was reflective of my intention from the video. But yeah, it was, I worked pretty much entirely to video footage on that project. So they were both very different creatively, despite both being narrative experiences.
Cool. Yeah, incredibly different approaches, but really cool. Like especially Thomas Was Alone, where it goes straight in engine. I mean, the system you're describing, you know, I can visualize how I would put it into Wise, but working with a programmer to kind of make that all work.
No, definitely, and a completely unmusical programmer, by the way, as well. So yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Super interesting. Cool. So you recently worked with the Nashville Scoring Orchestra, and I just kind of, I just kind of want to hear how that was as an experience. I mean, like, did you often work with live players, and how do you find that?
Yeah, I didn't do for the first half of my career. I would say pretty much everything that I ever did was all in the box, but that was fine because it was predominantly synth-based stuff anyway, so there wasn't really much cause for it. Lost Words was the first time that I ever worked with an orchestra before, a live orchestra, sorry, and that was a really transformative experience for me. Like the feeling of hearing your idea that you had in your head just brought to life by some of the most talented musicians out there is not something I will ever tire of, and something I look back on to this day with so much fondness, because you know that first time was really, really special, and that was a very personal project to me as well. Like the subject matter of you know, looking at the grieving process through the eyes of a child. You know, everyone's got their own experiences, and we all put parts of ourselves into that. So the music was super emotional, and yeah, just kind of hearing that emotion being intensified by the human element of it was a really incredible experience. So I think since then it's been the opposite. I'm not sure if I've actually worked on a project since then which didn't have a live budget. So yeah, it was like one half of my career was in the box, and then the other half was the opposite. Although obviously sort of mock everything up, but
yeah. Are you conducting your own music when you work with orchestra?
No.
Okay.
No, absolutely not. No, I'd look like an absolute idiot if I did. I'd put my ass on my elbow, I'm afraid. I was a guitarist, self-taught guitarist in bands and stuff growing up, so I never had any classical training or anything, and I'd much rather. It honestly requires so much mental focus for me to sort of follow a score whilst trying to analyze the performance and make sure that it's being interpreted how I want it to be. That's just sitting in the production booth. So never mind trying to make sure that I'm cueing in the right section at the right time, at the right dynamic, and so on and so forth. It's just, yeah, way above my pay grade.
Yeah, I think probably being in the booth also has a lot of pros. I mean, I always find that when you go up on the podium, you kind of swap your ears out for significantly worse ears because you're so stressed. And so
Right.
you listen, you know, it sounds great in the room, and then you listen back to it, and it's like, how did I not catch, like, the clarinet was playing the wrong note? And so, yeah, it's great that you get to kind of be at least a little bit more relaxed in the booth.
Yeah, I definitely have more of a producerial ear, I would say. I much prefer sort of being in the booth and hearing how the music's playing with the prelay, so on and so forth. Did I get the right nuance out of the performance? Never mind if it was like technically accurate to the score the whole time. Like, you know, these are the kind of nuances that I'm listening for. And so, someone who's an actual conductor, of course, can do all of those things at the same time, and they will often correct. You know, they won't need notes from me because they'll correct the performance themselves. But yeah, it's just a level of skill that I haven't invested any time into it, and I'm not going to. But it looks incredible if you can get that sort of, you know, cool video shot of you.
Yeah, you go to the podium at the end and you take a picture.
Yeah.
Very cool. So would you say it was like really a stark divide between mock-up and live players, or do you kind of do a hybrid most of the time?
No, a very stark. If you hear my mock-ups, the players are definitely doing me a lot of favors, I can assure you. To be fair, when I started working with Disney, they they weren't happy to hear kind of rough sketches and trust me that it would be all right on the night. They really wanted a mock-up that sounded real, and there's just not enough hours in the day for me to, like, that's a lot. That for me, that's the longest part of composing. Like, I'll come up with the idea reasonably quickly and I'll flesh out the orchestration. I mean, that normally takes like a bit of time, to be fair, but yeah, the actual composition process doesn't really take that long. But then trying to get everything to actually sound like real people have played it, like, I take no pleasure from that process whatsoever. It's really laborious, really time consuming for me, and it's just not really a good use of my time, particularly if you've got multiple projects on board and stuff. So I actually brought on an assistant to work with me because I had 3 projects running simultaneously at that time, and it just wasn't going to be productive for me to spend ages. I know some people can make mock-ups sound awesome like really quickly. My assistant is one of them, so that's why they got hired. But yeah, it's just not something that comes naturally to me, because I literally never written for orchestra before like 2019, 2018 or something. I never had any classical schooling, so I'm literally doing everything by ear. And yeah, it was just, again, not a good use of my time. So I think it's important to recognize what your strengths are as a composer, but it's even more important to recognize what your weaknesses are and to not be too proud to reach out and build up in areas where you can improve.
Yeah, and I mean, having listened to your scores, it's incredible that you're just kind of doing that by ear. That's very cool.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, a lot of practice, but yeah.
So, do you find that when you work on a new project, you're often kind of pitching the idea of using live players to developers?
Sometimes, I mean, it can be a real struggle sometimes now, honestly. It's sometimes you get those beautiful projects where it's already been decided that that's what they want to do, and it's not even a conversation. You just go in and that's the expectation, so it's great. But other times when you're working on something and they want it to be predominantly traditional instrumentation, but then they don't see the value in getting it done like some genres of music in particular, like Illusion Island, for example. That style of music is never going to sound good mocked up, well, not compared to the source material that you're supposed to be deriving your inspiration from, and so on and so forth. That is orchestra all in the room, leaning into each other for the performance, getting that magic and sparkle, and you just can't fake that to a really high degree. But then, if it's just kind of string pads and a bit of a hybrid score where you've got some, sort of cool synth work going on, then you can get away with it. Maybe you hire a few soloists to bring your melodies to life, but you can definitely trick the ear into believing that they're hearing something which is more live than the reality is. But yeah, if someone hires you for a full orchestral score but they have no live budget whatsoever, then that's I'm probably not really the right person for that, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. Like, it's not, I don't consider one of my skills being making a fake orchestra sound real. It's just not something that I've invested enough time into to get really good at. I just don't have the inclination. What I am good at is, actually writing music and composing. So that's where I choose to kind of put the majority of my focus. And when you know that it's being recorded live anyway, it kind of forces you, it makes me be even lazier, because I'm like, it doesn't matter what the mock-up sounds like, because it's all going to sound great after they've played on it, so who cares, kind of thing. You just bash out some bar chords on an ensemble pad, and away you go, and then it's my orchestrator's problem after that. But no, you obviously can't do that on other projects. So yeah, it really does depend. I've had to really fight tooth and nail for a budget before.
Yeah, do you have any like tips and tricks or anything that has worked particularly well to convince developers of like just how much of a difference it is?
Yeah, you have to get to know the person that you're working, like find out who the decision maker is on this kind of thing, and get to know them as people. One example I can give you, I worked on a really amazing project recently that I got to go to Air Studios to record for with choir. It was my first time working with choir, and that was absolutely incredible. But that had no live budget to begin with. And what I did was, when we kind of agreed that we wanted it to have choral elements in the score, I said to the writer, who was also the creative director, you know what would be really incredible is if we came up with like some custom lyrics based on your writing for the game to then actually get brought to life by a real choir. And his eyes just immediately lit up, and I could tell I could tell immediately that I planted the seed. And then once I got him kind of excited and on board, he then went off and kind of fought for me. So I didn't even really have to have those conversations. So finding an ally in a key position in the dev team can often lead to good results. But ultimately, you really have to, I don't know, if you've got previous live work that you can share, then that often helps you say, look, this is the sound of the mock-up, this was what it sounded like after it had been recorded. Then they've got that direct A and B, and that helps sometimes as well. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, you know, you have to know when to say when. Like I've lost, you know, these causes before as well. Like I've fought tooth and nail to have a live budget, and then ultimately it's got to a point where I either have to accept that it's not going to happen or walk away from the project. So sometimes you have to know when to stop, but it's always worth putting your case forward. And it's hard. It is hard if you're working on lower budget stuff in particular. They need that money for other things that are just more important things from a development perspective than having live music. If you're on a project where every penny is kind of accounted for, it's going to be very difficult. If you're working on something with a bit more of a substantial budget, then it's always worth having that conversation. Like even on lower budget stuff, you know, like we were kind of saying earlier, there's never a case where you can't scrape a few £100 together to get some live players on your melodies. Get the top line live, then blend, send it all to the same reverb, glue it together with a compressor. Spend some money on a good mix engineer actually, because that's honestly half of it. But yeah, if you can get at least sort of one live element in a recording, which is normally achievable for any budget level, that will go away to tricking you into perceiving that it's actually listening to a live performance in general. So it's always worth at least kind of exploring, rather than focusing on what you can't do. You know, like look at what you can do, and then sometimes it's even cool to work within those limitations. If you've got budget for 4 or 5 soloists, why not try composing a really minimalist score which actually only utilizes those instruments? And I know a good friend of mine, Kevin Penkin, actually did that on a mobile game called Florence, which did very well, and I think he got nominated for a BAFTA for that music. But he chose his palette because he could only afford a pianist and a cellist, and that entire score is a love letter between piano and cello. You know, lots of call and response and counter melodies weaving in amongst each other and stuff, and gorgeous score. But yeah, everyone's like, oh, how did you come up with the idea to do that? And it's all I could afford. So yeah. Yeah, it's cool to work within limitations sometimes.
Yeah, I totally agree that, you know, if you can't get a developer to like hire a whole ensemble, just having even one player or a quartet or a small ensemble like that, either alone or hybrid, can just add so much to the score.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and if you play something yourself, yeah.
Totally. Like I mean, it's electronic, and I play in all my percussion parts, you know, and just like having, having like those velocities and everything, is really helpful. Cool. And then I love what you were saying about kind of being strategic and appealing to people's kind of what interests they have, like the narrative person, and telling them, we can incorporate your narrative into this.
That's it.
Genius. Really great advice. Cool. So you brought up Disney Illusion Island a couple times, and I would really love to kind of talk to you a little bit about that soundtrack. Kind of starting with, again, the more sort of business side of it. If you can talk about it, how did you get connected to that project?
God, yeah. Oh, yeah, no, it was it was a guy that I met from back in the band days, actually. I played a gig with this other band from Essex in the UK, and their guitarist was a programmer at Jagex who make RuneScape and the Transformers MMO and stuff. So I got chatting to him because this is while I was doing my dissertation, which was you know, basically creating my own game music portfolio. And I think I not so subtly asked him if there was any work experience going. And he said he'd be in touch. But I didn't hear from him for ages after that. But then when I did, it was he was the one who gave me the introduction to Mike because they worked at the same company together. So I got the Thomas Was Alone job thanks to that connection with him. And then to this day, I think Thomas Was Alone is one of his favorite all-time game scores. So I knew that he'd always said that he'd like us to work together if the opportunity ever arose. And he started his own studio in 2015, I think. But they were just kind of self-funding at the time, and there wasn't really an opportunity for us to do anything together. But they reached out to me when they got a contract from Rare Studios to remake Battletoads, because that was a entirely kind of guitar-based, hair metal, 80s kind of thing. And obviously, you know, we knew each other from the band days and stuff, so I think he thought I'd be a good fit for that as a guitarist. It was really cool. To this day, it's the only time I've ever had the opportunity to play my actual instrument on a score before. But we got on really well, had a great creative working relationship together. And then after that, they got the contract with Disney, and they very kindly reached out to me again to come back, and just trusted that I'd somehow be able to adjust from 80s hair metal to sort of 40s and 50s classical scores. But yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And so, you know, with such an established IP like the Mickey Mouse universe, and you were touching on this a little bit, talking about how, like, you know, you have to have a live ensemble for that. But how do you find working on something that just has such a established sound, but also kind of putting your own voice into it?
Terrifying. Yeah. No, super intimidating. Honestly, it was a real level up, not only for my career but also for my compositional ability and experience. I'd never had to write anything with that level of complexity before. Even when working with orchestra on other projects such as Lost Words, there was a lot more of a contemporary fantasy. So not, when I say that, I don't mean you know, like John Powell. I mean, you know, kind of you know, string pads with a nice melody over the top. You know, it was kind of easier orchestral music. But yeah, this was a different ballgame entirely. But yeah, it was, I would say, fortunately, actually, we weren't allowed to license any of the pre-existing music because Disney, there were so many different branches of it. Now it's a literal nightmare to try and pluck you know, a melody or a piece of music from one particular IP. There's so many hoops that you have to jump through. So they just said flat out at the start, we can't use any pre-existing music. So that was actually really cool for me, because it meant that everything had to be bespoke. So even if we were leaning into that kind of language and palette, it still had to be completely original melodies and arrangements and so on and so forth. So it wasn't too difficult for me to put myself into it because, you know, I had to. But it was very intimidating, just kind of knowing the level of expectation that there was. You know, there's not really a more identifiable character in the world than Mickey Mouse, and been around for decades now. You know, some of the most iconic cartoon music ever heard, probably. It's literally called Mickey Mousing, you know.
Right.
So, yeah, like taking the time to study and hours worth of active listening to the kind of musical heritage there to make sure that I was paying the correct amount of homage to where we came from, but whilst also, you know, making it more contemporary. Because the reason that Mickey Mouse sounds the way that he does is because the music that was popular when he was created was ragtime and jazz. So that's just followed him throughout his career, but it wasn't, you know, an intentional choice. That was just what the popular music was at the time. It's not the popular music in 2024. So I tried to pick what I felt would be the most recognizable aspects of the traditional Mickey Mouse sound, and then combine that with a more sort of modern contemporary fantasy sound. So lots of chromaticism, lots of accidentals in the melody and the harmony, frankly. I tried to pick a few colors which I thought were really idiomatic to the character, such as the whistle. The actual live, we got Mickey Mouse's official whistler to whistle on the score, which was
that's so cool.
Really cool touch, yeah. And yeah, just sort of cherry picking little moments like that to sprinkle in to make sure that you know, there's also like kind of harmonic language as well that immediately kind of puts you in, gives you a Disney feeling, so to speak. So yeah, all of these little touches. Other than that, as I would any other project, you know. So yeah, it really wasn't too difficult to find my voice with the project, but it definitely was a learning curve at the same time.
Yeah, I mean it's like such a delightful soundtrack, and it's just kind of like surprising to hear that you didn't have a background in that style of music. Really, really cool.
Yeah, no, it took a long time for me to kind of get comfortable with it, and even then it was a collaboration. You know, I had an amazing orchestrator on it who, rather than literally just taking the dots off the page and printing them off for the players, I encouraged him to make suggestions, because there's stuff that you can do in the room live, which is very easy and idiomatic for a player of an instrument to do, which is incredibly difficult to replicate to a good standard in a mock-up. So we always intended for the mock-ups to kind of be, rather than these rigid guides of what the final product would be like, we intended for there to be a bit of the word has left me. What's it called when you make something up? Improvisation.
Yeah.
So it was written with the intention for the players to put some of their own ornamentation, improvisation or skills to work on the score. So yeah, some of the more sort of complex moments, perhaps, you know, were more happy accidents than necessarily intended, but it all came together in a really beautiful way, and I'm super proud of the results. It's definitely you know, my proudest work to date, and equally I hope no one ever asks me to do it again. But
Cool. So I mean, I've noticed looking at your body of work that there's a lot of diversity of genre there, and that's something that I kind of personally wonder about a lot, because you definitely hear people giving advice about, oh, being a generalist is good because you get you know, as many more opportunities from kind of being able to write in different genres, and then other people will say, no, you kind of have to become known for one thing, and if when you have kind of a consistent brand, you'll find work. You know, you'll be pigeonholed a little bit, but it will help you find work. So as kind of a more versatile composer, have you found that there are clear positives or negatives to that?
Such an interesting question. Honestly, for me, the best part of the job is the fact that pretty much every project that I work on is so wildly different from the last one. I find that so creatively fulfilling and inspiring, and I would personally struggle a lot if I ever became typecast as the person that you go to for X score. I would find very quickly that I was starting to repeat myself, and honestly, a lot of my inspiration does come from almost having to learn like a new style of music or a new style of writing or something every time I get a project. That said, there's definitely something to be said from a branding perspective for becoming kind of synonymous with, you know, being the go-to person for X genre. If you can, you know, become really known as the leading voice in a particular space or something, then that's obviously a very powerful position to be in. But then equally it's going to preclude you from just as many opportunities, if not more so, than the ones that it kind of gives you an advantage over. So it's hard to say. For me, I'm super happy that people see me as someone who can write to a high standard, regardless of the genre that they require. But for you could probably ask 10 other people way more successful than me, and they say the opposite. So it really depends on the individual, I think. Pros and cons to both sides. Yeah, swings and roundabouts.
Yeah. And I mean, I think with just like with every piece of advice, it's always important to take it with a grain of salt and find
Absolutely.
what's right for you.
Yeah. People always say it's better to be a master of one trade rather than a jack of all of them. But I think there's a bit of middle ground between that myself.
Yeah, I'm totally with you personally as well. So actually, we're not quite at the Q&A yet, but Santiago is asking a question, which was kind of going to be my next question. So we're going to spotlight it here. So what is your experience in interactive music with tools like Wise/Fmod, and what challenges do you see there as a composer?
I mean, my experience, every single project that I've ever worked on has had an interactive score. So I've been responsible for defining the music design. I've never really had any interest, or rather, there's never really been any need put on me to physically be the person who's plugging it in and setting it up. But I'm always the person who's defining it. I don't think I've ever had a music system dictated to me before I've gone onto a project. Rather, they're always looking for me to kind of guide that side of things. So it's very important that you do have a working knowledge of what the functionality of middleware is, what you can achieve with it. But in terms of actually physically being the person who's plugging everything in and setting it up, no, I wouldn't say that is, well, certainly in my own career, that it hasn't been necessary. But it's not going to hurt you at all. In fact, on the contrary, I would recommend everyone kind of starting out in their career that they do become au fait with that, because it can be a great way to get your foot in the door. There's tons of job openings for audio programmers in the industry. There's not that many for composers, so it can be a brilliant way to get your foot in the door with a company. And then once you're in there, maybe an opportunity comes up for an additional cue here and there, and then you can start to build things up. So it can be and is a super useful and valuable skill, but it's yeah, I would be lying if I said that I was you know, I'm certainly not someone like Olivier de Rivière, who takes consummate pride in that side of the job and stuff. For me, it's a necessary tool to know that the most important aspect is always the music for me, and creating the right emotional response from the player. That's first and foremost, and then you figure out how to make it play nicely for the experience that you're writing for. But again, you'll hear a very different answer from many other people.
Well, and it sounds like even though you're not directly putting things into Wise or Fmod, you kind of have an awareness of how it's going to work interactively.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. You have to have that. You do have to have that. Yeah. Unless you're working in AAA and there's like a music team who will predefine all of that stuff, and then you just literally, punch out the assets for them and throw them over the wall, and that's it.
All right, thank you, Santiago, for your question. We'll get to more questions in just a bit. I had maybe like 2 more questions I wanted to ask you. So you are based in the UK, and I'm kind of curious about the industry there. So, I mean, do you find a lot of your work domestically, or do you find yourself going out to a lot of international conventions to meet people, to find work? What proportion of your work would you say comes from your kind of home turf?
I would probably say 75% UK based. Earlier on, I worked with a lot more people from the US, to be honest, when I was working on sort of smaller projects to build up my resume and skill set. I for some reason, used to get reached out to by a lot of animation students at a particular college in the US, and for their final exams or their first sort of real life working thing. They'd quite often reach out for me to score their projects for them. But yeah, now I would say it's definitely more UK based. But I do go to GDC most years. I go to Gamescom most years, which is in Europe. It's kind of the more like a PAX type thing, I would say. It is really useful. I pretty much every job I've ever had has been as a direct result of a relationship that I've made at an event, which you then go on to nurture through following each other on socials, and then they see your career updates and stuff, and then you keep going for beers together when you see each other, and then one day in the distant future, the stars align and you're free when they need you, and you end up working together. I'd say that's more or less every job I've ever had has come that way. So yeah, it is super important. But yeah, I think the majority of my clients do tend to be UK based now.
Cool. And my last question for you is kind of about advice to new composers in the industry, but I think you already gave such a great piece of advice, which is investing in long-term relationships and not thinking of things transactionally, because it's really hard to see it, especially when you're earlier on in your career and you're like here and you only see what's in here. But you know, it ends up panning out to just kind of invest in things that may or may not lead to an opportunity. That is kind of how you end up with those opportunities. So
Yeah,
yeah.
no, definitely. You have to be in the position to find your luck, as they say. You never know which project is going to be the one that leads to the next big thing for you. So it's always important that you make sure you're putting your best foot forwards and using every opportunity as an advert for your ability as a composer. That's the way that I used to look at it, even if it was a project that I maybe wasn't super excited about or that I didn't think was going to set the world alight. I saw it as an opportunity for me to show people what I can do, and I'd always, strive to write the best music possible, regardless of what it was. So I think that's a really important kind of mindset to carry through with you, because those early projects often aren't going to be particularly exciting sometimes, but it doesn't mean that you can't still, put your best foot forwards.
Yeah, I think the track that's gotten me the most work is from a game that got canceled. I just
Oh, no
really
way.
love the track.
Yeah.
Send it for pitching on things. So,
oh wow, yeah.
totally,
Well, there you go. Yeah. Worst case scenario, you've got a great piece for your reel. So yeah.
Totally. So yeah, any before we move on to Q&A, and if people want to start popping their questions in there, you can do that, and we'll make our way through. Any last parting piece of advice for new composers in the industry?
Yeah, honestly, I think being good at writing is less important than being a good business person these days. Like, take it for granted that you have to write music to a high standard and create music that people consider and perceive to be of value. That, like, if you're not at that stage yet, then you've got a lot of work that you need to do before you even like start worrying about how you're going to get a job. Like, but take it for granted that you're already writing music which is at least of comparable standard to a broadcast standard music anyway. After that, it's really about everything else other than writing music, which is the least romantic way possible of looking at an art form. But unfortunately, it's just so true in this day and age. The people who are really successful are often the ones who are the most entrepreneurial rather than the ones that are necessarily the most talented. And then sometimes you do get a cross section there, but I'm really, really bad at that side of it. I got so lucky that I kind of caught the back end of the indie boom where it was still a relatively open marketplace, and like just the saturation level of, I think there's over 2,000 games a week on Steam. And back then it was a much more curated process. So if you got a game on there, you were guaranteed visibility and so on and so forth. But it's so hard to cut through the noise now. But the people who do so are the ones who can, use their socials to good effect. Go to all of the meetups and in-person events that you possibly can. Networking, it's a relationship-based industry. It really is. They say you sell it in sales in general. They say you sell yourself rather than the product, and I think that's very true. So being a likable, personable person who can strike up conversations with people and be a fun, pleasant person to be around is going to get you hired as much as kind of being a musical genius is. Probably more so the other way, if anything, because there's going to be tons of veteran geniuses out there whose music will never see the light of day. But equally, there's some quite average writers, in my opinion, who are among the most popular in the world because they know how to play the game properly. So I'm really sorry to kind of put it in those terms, and you can choose to pay as much or as little attention to me as you like. But from my experience, from what I've seen over the past almost 15 years, that does seem to be the way that things are going. So invest in your business skills as much as your musical chops would be my advice.
I think that the silver lining there is that I think we're seeing less and less people who are really jerks kind of getting ahead. And I think there is this old school mentality, this like kind of Bernard Herrmann kind of situation where it's like, oh, if you're terrible to everyone around you, but you're really talented, you'll go far. But like,
oh
that
god,
doesn't really cut it anymore.
No, you will never get hired again if you need to be a problem solver. Once you get your foot in the door, once you get that first opportunity, then you need to make yourself indispensable to whoever you're working with. The answer is yes to every single question. You need to become a problem solver. You need to make their lives as unstressful as possible. You do not take feedback personally. You do not push back. You remind yourself constantly that you are doing a job and performing a service for someone else. You're not writing music as a hobby. Ideally, you can write music which you still take creative fulfillment from whilst ticking the boxes necessary for your brief, but you need to respect and appreciate the dynamic that takes place when someone pays you to write music for them, and the ones that can get ahead are the ones who, you know, make people's lives easier, not harder.
All right, so we're going to get into audience questions now. So again, if you want to ask a question, you can just click on that Q&A tab and type one up. So I'm going to go up the list. So we're going to start with Melly, who's asking, what challenges did you face transitioning into professional video game composition, since you don't come from a classical musician or orchestral background? What strengths did your unique background provide?
That's a really good question. And I'll answer it backwards. So in terms of strengths, I, to this day, tend to write music in pop form because my entire background was in songwriting. My natural kind of inclination is always to craft a piece so it builds towards a chorus and has a payoff. And I find melody writing comes to me very naturally because of my kind of songwriting background. It's not really something I ever struggle with. In terms of challenges, yeah, anytime I was asked to write a piece of music that wasn't a 4-chord pop punk song was a challenge when I was starting out, because that's, if you didn't want kind of bad Blink-182 ripoffs, then I wasn't really your guy at the time. But then, you know, every project you learn a bit more, you grow a bit more, and yeah, it's another reason why I'm so grateful that every project has been so different, because it's been such a learning experience for me throughout my entire career. The next project that I work on will be another learning experience for me, no doubt. So yeah, it took a lot of time to, sorry, I've just gone dark. I'm trying to get my screen so back. There we go. It took a lot of time for me to, you know, get up to scratch. I'd never even written for, you know, media before I left uni, and then I had to, when I had the opportunity to work on Thomas Was Lane, I had to sell my guitar and amp to even buy like a second-hand iMac and a like 2-octave MIDI keyboard and a second-hand copy of Pro Tools, because that's what I learned on at uni, but I didn't have access to their facilities anymore. So I had to say goodbye to the dream of being a rock star to try and, you know, give myself a chance in games, and fortunately it worked out. But yeah, there were tons of challenges along the way. You know, having to do every single project by ear and by instinct, and just having to do active listening and kind of study to learn what the form and expectation is of the genre that you're writing for. But then, yeah, the strength kind of comes from, I guess, not having preconceptions of how music's supposed to sound for particular genres. Means that you do end up putting a lot of your own natural voice and instinct into something. So I think that it's been a blessing and a curse, perhaps, shall we say.
All right, so we're going to move on to Elio's question, who's asking, looking back on your development as a composer, what specific resources, talks, projects, works that inspired you, etc., do you feel had the greatest impact on your growth? And what are some of the most valuable creative or technical lessons you've learned throughout your career?
I don't really feel as though I've used any set resources. Like, I haven't really ever, you know, utilized any YouTube videos on it. I mean, my university course was literally how to produce music to a high standard. So every aspect of music production, from recording techniques, mic placement, mixing techniques, composition, so on and so forth. So I got my grounding in kind of everything from my studies, I guess. And then after that, it was just a case of learning as you go. Kind of the best way to figure something out is by actually trying it. So I don't really feel like there's necessarily any kind of courses or textbooks that I could recommend that would, you know, that I felt really worked well for me, because it was more just a case of trial and error and figuring things out. And, you know, going to uni at the time, although even now, I don't know if I would necessarily recommend that. If you're, you know, you're there's so many resources available now, and particularly in the UK, I don't know if it's the same in the US, but it's so expensive to study now relative to when I was at school. You could be better off, you know, just trying to forge your own path. But then equally, you do get access to so many like-minded creative folk when you are in a learning environment like that, and particularly if it's an arts college which has a a film department or an animation department or something, that I can't think of a better way to kind of forge those early fledgling professional relationships. So it's definitely something to think about. But yeah, I'm sorry I can't really be of more help there.
But yeah, I think, what you learn in school is a great tool set, but I have found out, and from talking to other professionals who went to university and then kind of got into the professional world, it's a great starting off point, and then trial and error is just so much of.
Definitely. Yeah. I'm personally very grateful for my studies and everything that I picked up. So, it certainly worked well for me. I had a very small class size as well, so I got a lot of one-on-one tuition and attention from the tutors, and just having access to all of that equipment provided me with a grounding that I simply wouldn't have got if I hadn't gone there. So it definitely worked out well for me. But yeah, I don't know if I would still necessarily say, make sure you do this, otherwise you'll never make it in 2025. I just don't think that's the case. So
totally. Okay. So we have a question from Shane, who is asking, can I ask who did your orchestration for Illusion Island?
You certainly can. It's one of the most talented people I've ever had the pleasure of encountering before. Evan Rogers. He is now Harry Gregson Williams' right-hand man, and he orchestrates for him and Benjamin Wildfish over in Los Angeles. So I was very lucky to find him, or he actually found me, but at the stage of his career that he was at the time. And now he's literally working on the biggest Hollywood films around. But I had already contracted him to work on my next project together. So I've got him for at least one more dance before I have to go back into the market again. But no, he's been absolutely fantastic and a wonderful friend as well as collaborator.
Okay. And then Vlad asks a question for both of us. Do you have a feeling when a project is about to be canned, or it just happens? Like with big companies, sometimes even lead devs didn't know beforehand. So yeah, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I think you're more likely to have the rug pulled from you if you're working with a large studio. So if you're working in AAA, it's probably going to be above your pay grade a lot of the time when those kind of things are happening. But I think working with independent developers, or even in the AA or III sphere, whatever you want to call it, it's a lot more apparent when things are going well and when they're not. And most people usually try and keep the team apprised of such things rather than hide it from them, because people need to find new jobs and so on and so forth. So that the more notice that they can be given, the better. And I personally haven't had the misfortune of working with any bad actors so far. Like everyone I've worked with has been super lovely in the industry and wants nothing but the best for their team. So, but then I've also been very fortunate. I haven't been massively affected by cancellations in my career. I've had one or two projects kind of fall through, but then it was always very obvious and apparent that that was going to happen, in answer to your question. So I think it really depends what level of project you're working on. But yeah, yes and no.
Yeah, definitely agree that it tends to happen. Like, you tend to get blindsided more with like AAA, bigger studios. And if you're interested, by the way, in that subject, I really recommend a book called Press Reset by Jason Schreier, just about why the industry is like this, why we get into cycles of layoffs this way. Certainly for indie, like David was saying, you tend to know a little bit more. I think it's a little bit more rare that just kind of happens to you. And when it does, you learn from the experience, and you become better at recognizing red flags before you even get onto a team.
For sure, and you always need to hedge your bets. Like I learned very early on in my career that you can't ever afford to put all of your eggs in one basket, even if you think it's an incredible opportunity. One of the traps that I used to fall into was if I signed onto a new project, then I wouldn't really push the networking side of things too much, because I knew that I had the secure income and I knew that I had the future PR visibility of this project when it came out, so I wouldn't push too hard to find additional work during that time. And it only takes one of those to fall through, and then you're left scrambling and starting from scratch. So it's not particularly glamorous, but like even when you're kind of writing and in your creative zone and mode, you should always be looking for the next thing, and ideally have a few plates to spin at the same time. Say yes and figure it out later. If you think you're too busy bring someone on board to help you in, like I did. I knew that kind of polishing mock-ups was a big time sink for me personally, so I knew that if I could push that side of the job onto someone else, then I would be able to free up so much more time for me to actually write for other projects and so on and so forth. So there's always ways around it. But yeah, the more that you have going on, then the less affected you're going to be if and when the worst should happen with one of your projects.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of the Q&A, and we're a little bit over time, but I've been assured that that is fine. Thank you everyone for your great questions. Thank you for coming, and thank you so much, David. This was really, really interesting.
Oh, absolute pleasure, and thank you for the great questions. You definitely kept me on my toes.
All right, so we are going to conclude this stream. Make sure to check out the rest of the events today, and thanks also to the folks at Airwiggles for putting this on. Yeah, absolutely, and thank you everyone for popping in. I hope you were able to take something from my ramblings, but yes, I really appreciate it, and thank you for the questions. All right, goodbye everyone. All the best. Bye. Take care.